May 19, 1780. That date sat in my notes for 3 months before I understood what I was actually looking at. I had accepted the official account without much resistance, the way most of us do with events that are old enough to feel settled. Forest fires in the interior, smoke carried on unusual winds, a localized anomaly in the pre-industrial atmosphere of a continent still largely uncleared. The Connecticut legislature adjourning because candles couldn't hold back the noontime dark, strange, yes, but explicable. I filed it away under curiosity and moved on. Most researchers do. Then I started looking at the fuel load calculations more carefully. And once I did, I couldn't find my way back to the simple explanation. Because the darkness of May 19th was not a regional shadow. Contemporary accounts describe an opacity so complete, so total, that the color of the air itself had changed. Witnesses in Massachusetts recorded a brass-colored light in the hours before the blackout, a copper tint on the windowsills, a residue that wasn't behaving the way wood smoke behaves. I want to be precise here. I'm not saying the official record is lying. I am saying the official record may have inherited an explanation that was never actually tested against the physical constraints of what it was being asked to explain. When I applied standard combustion modeling to the documented area of effect, over 150,000 square miles of near-total darkness, the numbers didn't close. The required fuel mass wasn't there, not even close to there. That's the thing I need you to hold for now. Because if the darkness of 1780 cannot be fully accounted for by the fire model, then the question isn't just what caused it. The question becomes why the fire model was so readily accepted, and by whom, and in what particular moment in history. And when I started pulling that thread, the timing, the treaties, the maps that were quietly redrawn in the 3 years immediately following, I found something I wasn't prepared to find. A pattern that doesn't feel like coincidence. A silence in the record that is almost too consistent to be accidental. Something happened in 1780. The question this investigation is built around is whether what we lost in that darkness was weather or a world. The star fort problem came at me sideways. I wasn't looking for it. I had been tracing the atmospheric data from 1780 when a different thread appeared, a geometric one. Fort Independence in Boston Harbor, Fort Bertange in the Netherlands, the Citadel of Lille, built across different nations, different centuries, different engineering traditions, and yet their ground plans are nearly identical, not similar. Identical in their underlying geometry, a precise radial symmetry, points extending outward at angles that, I want to be careful here, do not optimize for cannon deflection the way the official military history suggests. The official explanation is elegant. The pointed bastions eliminated dead angles, allowing defenders to cover every approach with overlapping fire. Tactically sensible. I am not dismissing it, but the explanation begins to strain when you scale it against the actual geometry. Because the angular measurements of these structures, independently, across continents, consistently approximate the proportions found in fractal resonance patterns. The same proportions embedded in Tesla coil geometry. The same proportions appearing in the cross-sections of modern electromagnetic transducers. Hold that. Because what I cannot account for, working strictly within the military engineering model, is why these structures cluster near water, not rivers of tactical importance. Coastlines, confluences, places where conductivity is highest. That's not a defensive logic, that's a circuit logic. The ironwork is where it gets harder to dismiss. I want to approach this carefully, because the cathedral argument is the one most easily ridiculed, and I think that ridicule has functioned, whether intentionally or not, as a kind of insulation against serious scrutiny. So let me be precise about what I am and am not claiming. The iron spires of 18th century ecclesiastical architecture in Britain, France, and the American Northeast share a structural characteristic that the official record attributes to aesthetic convention, the Gothic inheritance, verticality as spiritual metaphor. I accepted that. It's a reasonable explanation. But when you measure the cross-sectional taper ratios of these spires against the geometry of a Hertzian resonance antenna, the correspondence is not approximate. It is, in several documented cases, exact to within tolerances that would satisfy a modern engineer. Let me say that again more carefully. Not inspired by the same aesthetic, not coincidentally similar, functionally identical in their electromagnetic geometry. And they are almost universally positioned near water, the Charles River, the Thames, the Seine. Remember that detail, the water proximity, because it will reappear. The red bricks surrounding these structures may matter too. Fired clay at specific mineral compositions exhibits measurable dielectric properties. I don't know what to do with that yet, but I know it keeps showing up. Which raises a question I wasn't ready for. If these were purely devotional structures, why do they behave like instruments? 3 years. That is the distance between the dark day of 1780 and the Treaty of Paris. 3 years between a continent-scale atmospheric event that the official record cannot fully explain, and a peace settlement that reorganized the territorial claims of 3 of the most powerful empires on Earth. The official account presents this as sequence without connection. A war ending on its own terms, diplomats in Paris drawing lines that reflected military realities on the ground. I held that explanation for a long time. It is not an unreasonable one. But the terms of the 1783 treaty are strange if you read them as a war settlement. They are less strange if you read them as an inventory. Britain ceding territories it had not militarily lost. Boundaries drawn with a precision that suggests prior surveying rather than negotiated compromise. The sudden, almost administrative tidiness of it, enemies who had been killing each other for years sitting down and parceling out a continent with the calm efficiency of estate lawyers. If these patterns are raising questions you haven't seen raised elsewhere, consider sharing this work. The deeper this scrutiny reaches, the harder it becomes to ignore. Now, back to 1783, because we're just getting started. What I cannot account for, working within the standard diplomatic model, is the coordination. Britain, France, the new American Confederacy, 3 powers with incompatible interests, negotiating simultaneously, all agreeing with unusual speed to stop. Not just stop fighting, stop asking questions about what they were inheriting. That is the thing that keeps returning to me, not who won, but what was already there when they arrived. The photograph stopped me completely. I want to be careful about how I present this, because photographic evidence is easily misread, and I have no interest in overreaching. But there is something in the early survey photography of San Francisco and Chicago that I have not been able to resolve, and I think it deserves to be named directly. The official account of both cities is one of astonishing speed. Chicago, largely rebuilt after 1871, erecting stone and iron structures of enormous complexity within years of the fire. San Francisco, a frontier settlement in 1848, photographed barely a decade later with civic architecture that suggests decades of accumulated institutional construction. The explanation is American industrial energy, manifest destiny made material. I understand the argument, but the streets are empty. Not sparsely populated, not caught between moments, empty in a way that a city under active construction is never empty. No scaffolding, no lumber yards, no the visible disorder of a place being built. The buildings are finished. The streets are wide and formally laid, and there is almost no one in them. Let me say that more slowly. The cities appear complete before the population arrives to fill them. I don't know what that means with certainty, but when you hold it alongside everything else, the treaty, the geometry, the darkness, the pattern that begins to form is not one of construction. It is one of occupation. Something was already there. The question is what happened to the people who built it. So let me try to hold all of it at once. The darkness of 1780 that the fuel load math cannot support. The geometric structures built independently across 3 continents to the same resonant proportions. The ironwork behaving like transducers. The treaty that reads like an inventory. The cities that appear finished before they were populated. Each of these, in isolation, is a curiosity, a footnote, something you file away and move on from. I know because I did exactly that, repeatedly, before the weight of the accumulation became impossible to set down. What the pattern appears to suggest, and I want to be precise about the word suggest, is not simply that a civilization existed and was forgotten. It is that the forgetting was the project, that the darkness of May 19, 1780 may have been not weather but erasure, not an atmospheric anomaly but an atmospheric record, the particulate remains of something being deliberately reduced to ash. Libraries, infrastructure, the physical memory of a system of knowledge that the inheriting powers had no interest in explaining to the populations they were about to govern. Let me say that plainly. The smoke may have been the archive burning. If you're finding this investigation worth your time, consider subscribing. This series goes places most channels won't touch. Now, back to what comes after the burning, because that is where the strangest evidence waits. Because once you accept, even provisionally, that the reset was intentional, a new question surfaces immediately. Not what was destroyed, but what was kept. What the inheritors chose to preserve, repurpose, and quietly fold into the new order, hiding it perhaps in plain sight. Here is what I am left with. A darkness that the mathematics cannot explain. Structures on 3 continents sharing a geometry that has no military justification. Ironwork positioned near water, tapered to resonant proportions, embedded in buildings that predate the populations who supposedly built them. A treaty that reads like an estate division. Cities standing complete and empty, waiting to be claimed. And a silence in the record so uniform, across so many nations, so many encyclopedias, so many maps, that the silence itself has become the most important data point in the investigation. That is the shape of what we have been looking at. I want you to see it whole now, before I say anything else. The question I cannot resolve, the one I have been sitting with for months, the one that wakes me at 3 in the morning and refuses to settle, is not what Tartaria was. It is not even what happened in 1780. The question is simpler and more devastating than either of those. It is this: if a civilization of that scale can be removed from the map, removed from the encyclopedias, removed from the memory of every nation that inherited its infrastructure, what does that tell us about the stability of the record we are currently living inside? I don't have the answer. I want to be honest about that. I have a pattern. I have anomalies that accumulate past the point of comfortable dismissal. I have questions that the official record has not, to my satisfaction, answered. That is all I have. And I think that honesty is the only thing that makes this work worth doing. If you have theories, if you've seen something in your own city's brickwork that doesn't fit the official timeline, I want to hear it. Leave it below. This investigation is larger than one narrator. The next thread leads to the bloodlines, to the question of who didn't make it through 1780 and who did and why. I wasn't sure I was ready to go there. May 19, 1780. The sky went black at noon, and somewhere in that darkness, the world we were told we came from was quietly replaced by the one we inherited.